Hey everyone, it's Car Market Expert Zipper here, and in today's video we're going to talk about the large divide here within the US when it comes to the car market. We're also going to talk about which brands are the best to buy from right now because, they've got a little bit of inventory. With that being said, I'd really appreciate it if you would paw that subscribe button because I post videos every single day. Also, Ben has a car buying guide as well, link in the description down below if you want to save time and money the next time you purchase a car. And with that being said, well, the content starts right meow. Let's talk about the car market divide here in the United States, and it is a very distinct line east to west. So if you live in a western state, what you're probably noticing right now is that car dealerships are starting to swell up with inventory and they're actually starting to negotiate on a lot of their inventory. Whereas if you live in an eastern state, you're probably noticing that there is still pretty much no inventory and car dealers aren't really willing to work with you when it comes to negotiating. And so we have to talk about why this is happening. So every single automaker basically cuts up the US into different regions based on the product that they have and how well that product sells. Some of them basically just do it based on just like cutting up simple lines. It varies automaker to automaker, but something that is pretty much uniform with every single automaker is there is a distinct divide east to west in the United States, and this is purely based on geography because if you look at the eastern half of the US, it's really easy to ship goods around. You have a massive river system, right? You have like the Mississippi River. You also have the coastline on the eastern half of the US with the Atlantic Ocean that is basically like another river system because of how those waters are. And so what this means for the eastern half of the US is it is pretty inexpensive to ship goods around that part of the country, and so it's a lot easier for automakers, right, to ship goods around that part of the country. Whereas if you compare that to the western half of the US, you've got the Rocky Mountains, and it is a complete pain because you don't have like waterways that you can use to just easily transport goods. Pretty much everything has to go via train or via truck. And so that makes it so that everything's a little bit more expensive to ship to the western part of the US, and it also typically takes longer compared to what happens with the eastern part of the US. And so with that in mind, automakers, know this because, well, they've been around here in the US for decades, and so they plan around this. And what typically happens when automakers build cars and release a batch is they'll initially release a majority of those vehicles in the eastern half of the US because they know that they can get them out to dealers a little bit quicker and a little bit cheaper, whereas they'll take a little bit longer to get those vehicles over to the western half of the US. And so that's actually why, this is on a side note, why a lot of car journalists live in the eastern half of the US. It's because they can get access to cars a little bit quicker than car journalists on the western half of the US, again, minus California. California's kind of its own little thing. And so what happened this year is a lot of automakers, started to ramp up production slightly, and they actually had some vehicles they could ship out. And so they basically flooded dealerships on the eastern half of the US. And this happened about, 3-4 months ago, which the market was in decline 3 to 4 months ago, but it was still hot enough that people bought up that inventory. And so then the automakers went, okay, well, we got to help out the western state because we just, kind of flooded the market on the eastern half and we want people to pretty much buy up all the product. So now we'll kind of, send a bunch of product over to the western states. And that is what I am seeing right now is a lot of these automakers are dumping off all of these shipments of vehicles to the western states. And well, the market has changed a massive amount in the last 3 to 4 months. And so whereas 3 to 4 months ago, people bought up all those vehicles in the eastern half of the US, well, now people are scared to buy cars, and so they're not buying them up in the western half of the US. And so what you can do with this knowledge is basically sell your car in the eastern half of the US and you will most likely get more money for it. And if you buy a car in the western half of the US right now, minus California, then you will actually have some negotiating power. And I'm seeing this happen in real time. I've had quite a few subscribers come out to Utah and purchase from dealers that I film at because they, first off, they just want to buy from a dealer that I film at, I suppose. But on top of that, they actually are getting a better deal at these dealers where I live at because of the extra supply. Now, I just want to quickly touch base on California. California is always just a weird market because first off, it has a huge population and a huge economy, and it's kind of like the most socialist state that we have here in the US. And so because of all the crazy taxes and everything that they have over in California, the car market is always over inflated. It's just, again, it's like own market. And so California is more similar to the markets over in the eastern half of the US than it is to to the markets in the western half of the US. That's kind of the best way to put it. But again, it's still typically even higher than most of the states in the eastern half of the US when it comes to car prices. And so California is almost always the worst place to purchase a car, and also, frankly, usually the worst place to sell a car as well, just because of all the taxes and just there's a lot going on there. That's why California is always in car news. But anyways, hopefully that information helps you guys out. Now let's talk about the manufacturers that have inventory and the manufacturers that don't have inventory. So basically, which manufacturers should you avoid and which manufacturers can you wheel and deal with? Let's start things off with Ford. So when it comes to Ford, it's really just going to depend on the product that you're looking at. So if you're looking at like a regular F-150 or something like a Ford Explorer, Ford Edge, again, they're a more normal product, then yeah, you have a chance to wheel and deal with that product. If you guys are wondering, the two contacts I have is Brett at Ed Kedley Ford. That dealership never charges over MSRP, or John Jenks at the Ford in Provo. They actually have some F-150s on the lot right now that I will be reviewing on Monday when you guys are watching this video. But the specialty product with Ford is still commanding price premiums. So like Bronco Raptors, regular Raptors, all that kind of stuff, there are still price premiums on that. Now, moving from that to the Stellantis brands, so Dodge, Ram, Jeep, Chrysler, Alfa Romeo, Maserati, pretty much all of these brands are starting to swell up with inventory. The brands that I have seen the most amount of inventory with is Ram, there's quite a bit, and then Jeep, there's quite a bit. Chrysler, it's still pretty thin, especially with like the Pacifica. And then when it comes to Maserati and Alfa Romeo, I doubt that many people watching this video even care about buying from those brands, but both of those brands, it's just like cars sitting in the lot, and they even have like 2021s on the lot right now with both brands. And so yeah, definitely struggling to sell, and you could probably get a pretty substantial discount with either of those brands. Now, moving from that to General Motors, it just depends. So if you're looking for a Buick, man, can you get a deal? Well, there's not a lot of Buicks out there, but they sit on dealer lots for such a long time that dealers will pretty much do anything to get rid of them. I think that General Motors needs to just like axe the Buick brand. Now moving from that to Cadillac, it just depends on the product. You might be able to wheel and deal on like an XT6 or like an XT4, but something like the Escalade or the new Escalade V, yeah, you're probably still gonna have to pay a price premium on those. And then moving to GMC, again, it just depends on the product. So like the new Hummer EV, those are going for like $100,000 over sticker, which is pretty crazy, but again, not a lot of them out in the market right now. But the regular Sierra 1500, like an elevation package, for example, those are starting to stack up on dealer lots, and so there's a chance to negotiate there. And then it seems like Yukons are still kind of sparse unless it's like a more baseline model. And then moving over to Chevy, again, it just depends on the product. So if it's like the new Z06 or like a Silverado ZR2 or just a C8 Corvette, yeah, those are still commanding price premiums. But if you don't want to pay over MSRP, the Larry Miller Chevy in Murray does not charge any markups over MSRP on any cars. That's actually where I'm ordering my Z06 from, so pro tip there. And then with regular vehicles, those are starting to stack up at Chevy dealers. So like anything with the 2.7 4-cylinder turbo in it that's a truck, yeah, those are starting to stack up on dealer lots, and just other vehicles like, you know, the Chevy Blazer, Equinox, so on and so forth. Now moving from that to Toyota and Lexus, they still don't have any inventory, and so there's not really any negotiating power. Now I have noticed that some base model vehicles with Toyota have started to stack up on dealer lots, so like SR5 4Runners, for example. So if you're looking for something like that, you might have a little bit of negotiating room, but I wouldn't expect a lot. And then stuff like, you know, TRD Pros, those are still commanding price premiums, but the price premiums have come down quite substantially. So yeah, pretty sparse with the inventory with both of those manufacturers. Now moving over to another Japanese manufacturer, Honda and Acura. Both of those are still pretty much gutted when it comes to inventory. There's just not a lot out there, but I can tell you that if you do want a new Acura, the Jody Wilkinson Acura in Salt Lake City, Utah does not charge any markups over MSRP. So yeah, neither of those manufacturers really have any inventory. Like there's nothing. Like every single time I go into those lots, it's like they have maybe like one car, and it's usually pre-sold. Now moving from that to the, I guess, Volkswagen Group. So first off with Volkswagen, they are not only discounting cars, but they're starting to have their lots filled up with, you know, regular stuff. So like Atlases and the new Taos and Jettas and all that. So yeah, there's definitely a chance to wheel and deal there. Moving over to Audi, it just depends. So like if it has an A or a Q at the beginning of of the name, then yeah, you probably can wheel and deal a little bit. But if there's an S in front of the name, not so much. And if there's an RS in front of the name, then yeah, good luck. There's probably still a pretty big price premium to pay on that product. Now with Porsche, it seems like, yeah, still not a lot of availability with those vehicles, and most dealers are still charging pretty big markups on them. However, I don't film for this dealer, but I do know that this dealer doesn't charge over MSRP. So the Porsche in Salt Lake City, Utah, I know that they just don't charge over MSRP for any of the new product if you're looking for an MSRP deal on that. Now, moving from that to another luxury brand, Volvo, they're starting to stack up, but again, there's a product split. So if it's a plug-in hybrid, you're probably not gonna be able to find one, but if it's just a regular, like everything's a hybrid with Volvo now pretty much, but if it's a regular B5 engine, then you'll probably be able to find some vehicles with that on the lot. Now moving from that to Jaguar Land Rover, again, it depends on the product. If it's something like the new Range Rover Sport or the new full-size Land Rover or the Defender, yeah, good luck. There's still a lot of price premiums on those. But if it's something like, a more baseline F-Pace or like a Land Rover Discovery, those are starting to stack up on dealer lots a little bit. And then moving from that to Mercedes, again, it just depends. So if there is a 63 in the name, AMG 63, then yeah, you're probably not gonna be able to get a deal on it. But if it's an AMG 53 or 43, those are starting to stack up on dealer lots, or just regular cars. So like a GLE 350, for example, it seems like those are starting to stack up quite a bit. Now, another luxury brand is BMW. So with BMW, inventory is still really sparse. However, the BMW in Pleasant Grove, Utah doesn't charge any markups over MSRP. So if you want a good deal on a BMW, just ask for Brendan there. Now with Mini, they're still struggling to sell cars. They'll pretty much always struggle to sell cars. So yeah, you probably have a pretty good deal, a pretty good chance of getting a deal on a new Mini. Now with Nissan and Infiniti, it's just going to depend on the product. So a lot of Nissan dealers are going to mark up like the new Z like crazy, but more regular product like a Rogue or a Murano, yeah, they're doing deals on that. And then with Infiniti, inventory is still pretty sparse, but it seems like they're starting to have some stuff come in, but there's not really a lot to happen there when it comes to wheeling and dealing. Now the next one is Mazda, and they're starting to get quite a bit of inventory, and so yeah, you have a pretty good chance of being able to negotiate some money off of the price. The last one is what I will call the Hyundai Group, and that is Hyundai, Kia, and Genesis. So with Hyundai, their regular cars are starting to somewhat stack up within dealer inventories, but anything that has like an N badge on it, there's still probably going to be a price premium, or they're just going to be very difficult to get. Now with Kia, they're still pretty sparse with inventory, but again, some regular cars are starting to pop up. So like the new Niro, for example, or perhaps like a Kia Sportage. Again, somewhat difficult to get some of this product, but again, there isn't like massive price premiums. But if it's something like the Telluride, yeah, there's probably still a pretty big price premium. But I will say that the Jerry Seiner Kia in Salt Lake doesn't do any of those crazy markups. So if you want a good deal on a Kia, there you go. And then Genesis, it's kind of an interesting situation. So yeah, there isn't a lot of availability with that product. There's a lot of hype behind the brand because, well, they're undercutting a lot of the other luxury automakers. And so yeah, there's wait lists that are months and months long. And so some Genesis dealers are starting to charge price premiums. Now the Genesis in Linden, Utah doesn't do that. So if you want a good deal on Genesis, there you go. And I think that pretty much covers all of the brands. So with that being said, that's going to sum things up for today's video. I'll see you. Are you upset with me for using you for my video intro? Are you? You won't even talk to me anymore? Is that how it is? Oh, he just wants food.